Right on.
Okay, I think that we're here. Excuse me. We are we are live.
Excellent.
Excellent
Is
indeed. Excellent
is your green
indeed.
light on?
Yes.
Okay.
I will have you know that I successfully managed the mute button last week. I didn't even say anything. I didn't even say anything. I was just in there with a bunch of
That's
mute
great.
button success, and I kept it all to myself. Um,
See, if you said something, we would have had fanfare,
no,
the
no,
confetti or
no,
something.
no, because the minute we do that,
We're
the whole situation goes down the drain. Goes down
gonna take a
the
sharp
drain.
left.
Yeah, let me just make sure that my audio settings are right so that we're not believing that we are transmitting sound to the world when we are in fact not.
Welcome to silent film.
All things old are new again. All right, Alicia Holland, I see you are here. I'm not even going to ask you to introduce yourself unless you want to. Today, I'm just going to ask you how you're doing.
I'm sleepy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm a little sleepy today. I'm dragging a bit.
yeah,
It's late night, early morning, not good sleep in between. So,
that's right. You were in court this morning.
yes, indeed. And it
God,
is Zoom court. So that means looking presentable for it, which I laughed when the judge was giving us the warnings ahead of time, like some instructions and etiquette. And she said, like, do not let me see you eating, drinking, talking to other people, or changing clothes. You may feel free to turn your video component off until I call for you. These are all things attorneys have done. I was
changing
like,
clothes? Like the eating and drinking, I get it. We spend so much time in front of these cameras. Um, and for us, I mean, we've been using Zoom almost exclusively in our work. I mean, that's not the only way we meet with people, but it's been our preferred technology for digital meetings since what, like 2017, 2016, something like
yeah,
that.
at least like 40 years or so.
Yeah, so this is like this is like years worth of I guess getting being comfortable with the technology. And so yeah, you do have or well, I don't think I've ever eaten anything. I don't think I've ever gone that far. And I know that I have never changed clothes, but
I haven't
yeah.
eaten in court, but I have sat through some long meetings where I have like string cheese, little apple slice, and peanut butter, especially if it's one that I just have to observe and I'm going to be on mute anyways. Then
Yeah.
sometimes I need a snack. But listen, I had a cup of coffee, and the way she said it, I was afraid to touch it the
Like,
whole
let me
time.
put this
Like,
coffee down.
like it can wait. Listen, this judge was a black woman. I wasn't about to try it. I was like, I know better.
You know what? Black or not black, with instructions that clear, I think that that clear and that reasonable, right? Some instructions just
Right.
need to be ignored, but instructions that are that clear and that reasonable, I think that you fail to heed them at your peril.
Already
Lisa's here.
just
Hey,
not
Lisa.
that. I feel
Excuse
like
me.
an interloper at the moment because right before this, I was just listening to the anniversary episode of the Stitch Please
Yay!
podcast, which is
Yes,
hosted by one Lisa Wolfork and special guest interviewer this week, Jill Bates Moore.
that
So
is
now I'm like,
true.
oh, I'm interrupting the conversation.
Oh my goodness, that is so true. So, that's one of the things I'm really joyful about. This last week was tough. This week started um it started as a continuation of that. right? There's been yet more death, yet more between. I mean, Chadwick Boseman's death after a years long battle with colon cancer that the majority of the world, including his inner circle, is just learning about. Um, that on top of Coach. Oh my goodness, why can't I think of his name?
John Thompson.
Georgetown coach.
John Thompson.
Yes, on top of his death, on top of yet more police shootings, on top of, right? It just seems like, I think for me, I was sitting with this feeling that the daily life, like the daily human experience, day to day, not in the long life sense, but the day to day human experience of being black is just not survivable. Like, there is death from cancer, there is death from COVID, there is death from police, there is death from, gratefully, from old age. But one of the things that struck me is that a number of these folks were young.
Very.
43, 53, 73. It's just like, jeez Louise. And so there is that feeling, sitting with that. And then also there is, at the same time, even though it is an idea that is in abject tension with this survivability idea, right? Is that I am thriving, right? Like, I have love, I have friends, I have community. And so I'm really grateful. I'm grateful that all of these things can exist in the same life space, in part because they do exist in the same life space, right? So I'm glad that I have access to joy, and that podcast was one of them. So Dr. Lisa Wolfork is the founder. She is so many things. She is and does so many things, and does them so well. One of the things that she has done is founded a community collective called Black Women Stitch, excuse me, which is built around one of her hobby loves, which she found that other Black women have as well, and so she built this community around it, and out of that community came the idea for a podcast, which she also started. It's called Stitch Please. And the Stitch Please podcast is now a year old. It is a whole year old. Lisa has been producing episodes, editing episodes, interviewing people, writing scripts, doing post production, all of the things she's been doing herself, and she's been doing that every week for a year, for an entire year. And so I had the
In
privilege,
addition to the rest of her life.
right? I had the privilege of interviewing her for this anniversary episode. So if you are interested, and trust me, you are, check it out. It is the Stitch Please podcast, and it is available on every place where you can
All the
access a
platforms.
podcast. All
Because
right.
Lisa that good, she made that happen too.
Indeed, indeed. So Shauna is also here. Shauna is saying hello, hello, hello. Hello. Thank you, Alicia, for letting us set up the live stream in this way. I know that it would be really a lot more convenient to your day and to getting lunch and to getting back to the rest of work, and that it would be a lot more sort of efficient, I guess is the word I'm thinking of, to just get into the live stream, get to the topic, talk about it, be in and out really fast, bada boom, bada bing. Um, and it was an intentional choice to build in every single live stream some time to check in and to really ask, how are you doing? To ask that question to each other and to ask that question to the folks who are here with us. So please, we are really asking, how are you doing? How are you doing? And and I think that that's important. I think that as I think it's always important, but as we can't be with one another physically in a way that feels safe right now, because it's still COVID, right?
Even though some of y'all are acting like it's over.
But yeah, but the idea of care and having somebody come and see about you, having somebody come and see about me and genuinely ask, I think is a thing of value, and I think it is a thing of legacy. So thank you for allowing that to happen on this space. So while people check in with us as we're checking in with them, you want to tell us what we're talking about today?
I would be happy to. So, just in case you didn't know already, this is the Legacy live stream. We are the lawyers of Dahlia Law Group, based in Oakland, California, and we are lawyers that work in legacy. So, as you're talking about it, and that is part of what we do as our work, like it is imbued in all of the ways that we speak, act, be, experience, and commune with our people. So this is just another extension of that, where we get to bring some of our legal training into that as well and share that with our people. And so we are in the midst of our series on the how-to portion of putting it together, and we've been spending a few weeks on trust in particular. And so we are working our way through the roles of the people that are involved. So who are the players on your little chart there? And today we are talking about trustees, what they are, who they are, and how to pick them. So that's our topic for the day.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Yay. I'm really excited about this topic because, and thank you for writing the outline and the notes for this. I am really excited for this topic because it's another one where I think that a lot of times people, like, we throw these terms around, right? We have a vocabulary.
I'm the trustee.
Right? We have a vocabulary, but we don't always have a thorough understanding of what the role and responsibility is. And so I think having that is really, really helpful because it's not difficult. One, it's not hard stuff, but also it just helps to put so many things into context. And so I'm excited to talk about this. So I'll let you kick it off, mostly because you wrote the notes, and so I'm just going to follow you. Okay, wait, hold on. I'm not a lazy lima bean. We decided to divide and conquer this week because one of the things that we're doing at the office is we're doing an enormous system switchover, and so it involves changing the technology for how we do our client communications, onboarding, blah 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 blah. So I am working with the tech folks on that and doing that. And so Alicia graciously said, I will take on the outlining for this week's episode. Normally we do it together. I don't normally just shift over all the things for her to do.
Well, since one of us is the great granny in the internet technology sphere, this was a good division. But I still think there should be sound effects and confetti poppers.
I am not turning on that ham horn. I am not turning on the horn. I won't do it.
So, fine. Well, apparently you are the trustee of
Of the
the
horn.
sound effect. Yes.
Right.
And so when I make that joke, what we will get to by the end of this is that you two will get that too and can say who is the trustee of various things in your world. Because by the time we get through the end of our conversation, we will have dealt with what a trustee is, what their duties are, and what their powers are. So, thinking about that first thing of the trustee and that example that we're talking about of she who controls all of the buttons for the sound effects, in Trustland, the trustee is really the one I think of as the muscle. Like they are the one with the gargantuan work of it all. Like the person who sets the trust up gets to write it on the pretty paper, and the beneficiary gets to just sit there and lounge in the sun and reap all of the benefits. The trustee is the one that is the muscle between the person who set it up and the one that's basking in the sun, reaping all of the benefits. So it is a big job. So, what they are going to be doing is they are going to be managing the assets that are held by this trust and then also distributing those assets if that's what the trust calls for. Ow. Sorry, I just bit my cheek. That
Why
hurt.
did you do it?
Oh no, but it was unkind.
I
'Cause it
require
hurt.
kindness. I require kindness. Wait, I'm sorry.
Ow.
I just thought about whatever that week was where you were in there, like we were still in like the depths of the heat wave and you were trying to be in there without turning on the fan and it was like a whole emergency. Sorry. I am going to
It's true.
focus. I'm going to focus even if it means pressing this mute button.
No, that would take us back to the episode that the judge was talking about of changing clothes, because that was also the week where everybody was saying put the fan on, and I'm like, my dress is a little short for that because this was not a standing proposition. So
You
I
know
will
what?
do that, but I need some pressure off to figure it out.
Okay.
Oh man.
Okay.
Remember you said about joy? These are
Joy.
things that bring me
Joy.
joy.
There
Like
must be
it's all
joy.
in there together.
It absolutely is. I'm just trying to get my face together because so much. I love
Yeah.
it. All right, friend. You're talking to us
So
about we're talking about trustees and
yes,
the fact that they have the muscle position. They are doing the heavy lifting in the trust.
they are indeed. So when we think about the trust, the person that's the initial trustee very often, particularly for the type of trust that we've been talking about, a revocable living trust, is likely to be the person or people who created the trust. And so when I think about this and explain it, I think of it as it's a goofy concept when you think about it because a trust is a contract. And so typically when we have a contract, it's us and to somebody else. So if you and I create a contract with each other, one of us has some obligations in the contract, the other of us has some obligations, and the paper in the middle that is the contract is where we're making some agreements about those obligations. So if I'm buying something from you, then it's going to say you going to give me X and I'm going to pay you B dollars in exchange for X. And if you don't give me or if I don't pay,
Yeah, if you
then
don't
these are
pay.
the consequences. Yeah. So that's what the paper says in a contract. Trust contract is a little bit different because it's still a contract, but it's kind of goofy in that setup initially. It feels goofy because the person who's creating it is generally on both sides of that contract. They're saying, I agree to create this trust and put some stuff in it, and I agree to be the trustee to manage the stuff that is in that trust. And so the trustee is the person that is the managing of that trust. So initially, it really isn't going to look or feel any different because it's still just you managing your stuff and doing your stuff and going about your business. The part of the trust where it becomes part of the legacy and estate planning piece is what happens next. Because in that contract, what we've also said is if I am not the trustee managing the stuff that's in here, who is next in line to immediately step into my shoes to take care of that stuff that is in the trust? And so when we're talking about those trustees, that's what we are talking about.
Got it. So the
Now,
trustee is this trust, and we talked about what a trust is, what makes a trust, how to set it up. We talked about that 2 episodes ago. So go back to episode 12, I want to say.
mhm,
It was, and you can get the full rundown on that. But the shorthand is that this trust is a contract that I make with myself. At least this type of trust that we're talking about, this probate avoidance trust, or remember, we also called it a revocable living trust. It's a contract that I make with myself in order to have some things happen in the event of my death or my incapacity. And the trustee, I hear Alicia saying, is the plug that actually makes the things happen that I said should happen in the trust. Did I get it, friend?
you got it.
Okay.
You did indeed got it. So when we talked about the trust and how to create it a couple weeks ago, we gave you some absolutely must do's and then some these are good ideas to avoid a mess later. And as it turns out, listing what are called successor trustees is not on the must do, but it is absolutely on the to avoid a mess later. Because it's possible that you just create the contract where it's, I'm putting my stuff in and I'm going to be the one to manage the stuff. Now, the part where we want to avoid a mess later is naming if it's not me, then who, and laying out who those next folks in line are to step in for us. Because otherwise, we have to go to court. And part of the probate avoidance of it all is we're trying to stay out of court and handle as many of these things privately. And if I have set my trust up in a way that as soon as something happens to me, we have to go to court, well, that is not what we wanted to happen. So, successor trustees are going to be the, if it's not me, next in line managers. And their job is going to then be to carry out those instructions. So, if it's during my lifetime, because I'm incapacitated, then the trustee's job is to take care of me because I am the primary beneficiary in that regard as that grantor. And then once I have passed away, it's going to be for those people that I have laid out as my beneficiaries, which when we talked about beneficiaries, that was last week's episode.
Mm-hmm.
So to find out who those folks are, you can tune back into that one. But the trustee is the one that is responsible for the taking care of everybody.
Right.
Now, as you can probably imagine, this is a big job. So it can be more than one person that you've named as a trustee. So you can have what are called co-trustees, people working together. That's one that I put a little asterisk on it for avoiding a mess, because one of the things to keep in mind is sometimes that can mean that we got a lot of chefs in our kitchen. And so trying to get a dish turned out when you got 5 people that are trying to be the chief chef in the recipe can be complex. But if it's necessary, you can do that. And your trustee can also have people working with them, which is another important thing to remember. So if they need to deputize some folks or engage some people to help them with that role, they are able to do that.
Yeah. So the trustee is sort of like an executive manager, right? The buck stops with them. They are in charge of making the trust actions happen, both according to the terms of the trust. Remember that, the terms of the trust, and also according to the laws that apply, right? So the trustee is in charge of making the trust action happen, but they are not required to carry out every single task that's necessary in order to make the trust action happen. So if in my trust, if I say in the event of my incapacity, right? In addition, trustee, to your duties to use my stuff that's in the trust to take care of me, I also want you to make sure that you that you take care of my sister's study abroad program or something like that, right? Then the trustee does not have to go to my sister, help her pick out the study abroad program, work out all the financing with the school and all of that. The trustee doesn't necessarily have to do all of those tasks, but when it comes time to fund the study abroad, the trustee is absolutely accountable for making sure that that check gets written or that money transfer is made, whether the trustee, her, him, or itself actually writes the check or presses the button themselves or not. A trustee can be an institution. Alicia's going to talk. Alicia will introduce more about that in a bit, but that's why I said her, him, or it. Okay, did I get it?
Mm-hmm. You did.
Okay.
So, in a minute is now, as it turns out. So, we said we're going to talk about what the trustee is, and then we're going to deal with the duties and powers. So, first, I want to talk to you about who can sit in that seat before we deal with the how we do that job. So, the who can sit in that seat, often it is going to be an individual person, but it can be an entity. So, if it's going to be an individual person, then it needs to be somebody that is at least 18 years old because they need to have the legal capacity to do things like signing documents, completing transactions. So they need to be legally an adult as well. They also have to have mental capacity to do this job. They are stepping into the shoes of doing your financial and business affairs. So they have to be able to have capacity to accomplish that. So if somebody has deemed them incapable of handling their own stuff, then they are most certainly not capable of handling your stuff on your behalf. Then the others are ones that are just thoughts that you want to be thinking about to avoid problems later. So pick somebody who's organized and diligent to be in this job. So if you think about it, this really is putting somebody else in the shoes of managing your stuff, your money, your finances. And so if you had somebody that can't keep track of their grocery list or any of their own money trying to step in and manage your things, that is probably not the person that you want because this is a job that requires some record keeping because there are some duties and powers that are involved here. So you want somebody that's organized, somebody that's diligent, somebody that's responsible because they are managing it on first on your behalf during your lifetime and then on behalf of the beneficiaries. This is not them managing their own stuff. They are doing a job on behalf of other people. Then you can have an entity, and then one other thing about that for the people side of it is definitely pick a successor because you're going to be the initial trustee. So you want that successor and pick an alternate to that person so that if something happens not to you, but to that person, that you're not immediately back in the same boat of needing to figure out some alternatives. So it's a really good idea to have at least 2, possibly 3 alternates and to be thinking about the generations of those people that you are putting in that seat so that you don't have to revisit this quite as often because you keep running out of people. So if your parents are the people that you would trust to have in this seat, great. And if your parents are in their 70s and 80s, then maybe think about an alternate after the parents for somebody that's your same generation or even maybe a bit younger than you to try to give this thing some legs.
Yeah. Also, you can, believe it or not, it is okay to allow your trustee to choose their own successor. So if you have selected well, right, you've chosen somebody that you trust, who is diligent, who even if they don't have their own affairs in order, because we've all had a hairdresser who did great hair but whose own hair was a mess. Right.
It's usually the nail lady.
So, but even if their own affairs are not in order, that they are absolutely diligent with about the things that they have care of on behalf of other people. I also want you to encourage that person in their self care journey. Um, but if you've chosen somebody well, then you can also consider giving that trustee the power to choose their own successor, because the deal is you can't see around every corner, right? Like you don't. I mean, you just don't know. You can't anticipate every single thing in life, but having that person be able to choose somebody to step in after them will also help to ensure that you don't quote unquote run out of trustees.
Yes, 100%. Then on the entity front, you can name an entity as the trustee. And as we're talking about the people trustees, while it is common that it is going to be somebody that is in your circle, either your family of origin or your family of choosing, it does not have to be. And so sometimes people will have somebody that's called a professional fiduciary, who is somebody that's going to be licensed to do a job like being a trustee for someone. And sometimes what people will do is pick an institution. So if you go to banks or financial investment companies, they will have they'll call it either a trust department, a fiduciary department, or sometimes even a trustee department. And so what that means is in that department, there will always be somebody qualified to be in the seat of a trustee. And so you name that institution. So Alicia's Big Bank of Goodness is named as the trustee in your trust. And that means as an institution, as a corporate fiduciary, what I will do is always have somebody in that department that their job as an employee of my big bank is going to be to serve as trustee of your trust to carry out those functions on behalf of your beneficiaries.
Trustees, sorry, there's a little bit of noise. One of my neighbors, I think, has cabin fever and has decided to just take the motorcycle out. But the motorcycle is not going far. I think it's just going around the
Just
block.
doing loops.
It's just
Yeah,
going around the
I hear
block.
you. One of my neighbors has some machine running that I kid you not, until the 5 minutes into this live stream, it has been quiet all morning. And I'm like, really? Now? Now is when you need to run this thing?
Yep.
Great.
So,
Welcome to the live
so it
stream. It's
is.
live. It
Right.
is, in fact,
This is
LIVE.
a life in progress.
Right.
So I think we were getting ready to start talking about trustee duties, though.
Yes, we are. So now that we've identified who might be sitting in the seat, let's shift and talk about what is the job exactly, because we know they got to do all the work. But there's some structure to what doing all of the work means. And so there is a word that I have been saying that I want to take a pause to actually explain. And that word is fiduciary. Fiduciary means the highest duty under the law. And so when I am a lawyer for somebody, I have a fiduciary obligation or duty to that person. That means I have to treat their money different. I have to treat their things separate, and I have to do everything I can that is within their interest as their counsel. When we have somebody serving as a trustee, that is the duty that they have on behalf of the trust and the beneficiaries of the trust. So while we may pick somebody that, as well meaning as they are, and they're trying to do a good job because this is my mama's trust and this is what she said she wanted us to do, their obligation is bigger than being child of mama. Their obligation is a legal obligation as a fiduciary. And so that's really important to remember, that it's not just because I mean well. Your duty is bigger than that
I,
in when you are sitting in the trustee seat.
yeah, and I think that this fiduciary duty point is a really important one to help guide our consideration of who would be a good trustee. who would be a good candidate for that job, because essentially you're staffing for this job, right?
Mhm.
Somebody who has good boundaries, right? Like that's it's really, really, really important, as Alicia was saying, as attorneys who handle other people's money. We have charge of other people's money, frankly, that is sometimes more than our own money, depending on what's going on. That is somebody else's stuff. We have to hold it separately. We have to treat it separately. We have to account for it separately and in a really transparent way. That has to be done. Otherwise, we run the risk of being outside of our fiduciary duty, right, to our clients. A trustee has the same level of responsibility, and it also it also means that you can kind of run afoul of that fiduciary duty without really even intending to, right? It's possible. And when I say run afoul, I mean you can make a mistake that is an unreasonable mistake in the context of the fiduciary duty, right? It might be a completely normal mistake for regular old Jill to make in her regular old life. Like, who checks their bank statement every single month? Regular old Jill does not. Okay, fight with your keyboard. All right, judge your friends. But but if if I don't check my bank statement every single month, right? That might be a quote unquote mistake, or it might be a thing that is, maybe it's not wise, but it's also not unreasonable in the context of my regular everyday life. In the trustee role, in the context of the fiduciary duty, knowing what's going on in that account that the trustee has responsibility for that belongs to somebody else, checking that bank statement is not not checking the bank statement to know what's going on with the account is not a reasonable mistake all the time in that scenario. So hopefully that's clear. Talk back to us if well, one, feel free to talk back to us, please, and to drop your questions as you have them. And also, I'm asking on this particular point, talk back to us and let us know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. So that speaks to one of the duties. So thinking about one of the duties, for instance, is to keep the trust property separate and identified. So in regular world, we might say, oh, you know what, for ease, I'm just going to put this money in my bank account and I have my little side paper that has my little running tally and I've got all of my receipts so I can keep track of it. Nope. Under your duty, your fiduciary obligation, it has to be separate. It has to be identified. It has to be accounted for. And so you've got to have the dollar for dollar and you cannot commingle it with your stuff because this is not your stuff. That is so important to realize. This is not your stuff. Even if you are one of the beneficiaries of the trust and also sitting in the trustee seat, this is not your stuff. It has to stay separate unless and until you've actually completed the transfer and it belongs to the beneficiary and not in the trust. It has to stay separate and identified and accounted for.
Listen, this is where the funk happens. When beneficiaries fight about the trust, they are fighting about either they believe they were supposed to get something that they are not getting somehow, which is that's a trust terms thing, that's a capacity thing. The trustee is not necessarily directly involved in that fight, but when the beneficiaries have beef with the trustee, this is where it is. What did you do with the assets? And you can see how this happens. You can totally see how this happens. Let me set the scene for you. My grandmother
Story time.
never talked to me as her, and when I say my grandmother, I'm actually talking about my great grandmother, never talked to me about money. She didn't talk to me about her bills. She didn't talk to me about, what she had to pay to whom. She didn't let me write checks for her, any of that stuff. Why? I'm just going to give everybody a moment to come up with the answer, and then we can say it together. Right. Because that's what
Grown
grown
folks
folks
business.
business. Yes. so so when Granny passed away, it's reasonable for us to think that Granny had all kinds of stuff that she didn't have, and that she didn't have all kinds of stuff that she did have, right? So coming to time for Granny's trust to be administered, right? The beneficiaries of that trust, right, could very well be thinking that Granny owned the house that she lived in. She may not have. That Granny had
Mm-hmm.
X amount of dollars of pension money in an account from Granddaddy's pension, which she may not have had. Or that Granny, it could be any number of things. And the only person who is there for the beneficiary to look at, to say, what is going on here, is the trustee. The trustee is the one who gets the questions about, well, what happened to Granny's house? I know that Granny had a bank account that had at least X amount of thousands of dollars in it, because she told me when I was 6 that that was going to be mine. Or I
And I
know
saw a page from the statement 20 years ago,
exactly. You know, I mean, this
which
happens
seem like ridiculous
every.
examples, but it happens.
No, it really does happen. They're not ridiculous at all, because this is. Remember that the trust is not a document that has to be registered anywhere. We talked about this in the previous episode. It doesn't have to be recorded anywhere. This is private financial business, right? But it is it is like the concrete statement of what is and what is to happen, right? And so these questions come up whether somebody has a trust or doesn't have a trust, right? I mean, how many times have you been at the funeral or at the repast and somebody is saying, now what happened to now what happened to the Cadillac? Now, she used to have that
We're gonna
Cadillac.
get the house.
That was right. I mean, these questions begin to happen before the final shovel of dirt is placed, or the headstone is even in place sometimes,
Or the
because
first shovel of dirt.
that's just the nature of people. That's just the nature of people. I'm not judging any of that. I'm just saying that every single one of us can identify a real life context where these questions are asked. And what I'm saying and what Alicia has explained is that the trustee is the one who not only gets those questions, but has the highest legal duty to address them. That's the deal. So when you're
Yep.
thinking about who's in this role, consider what they're going to be doing and when, right? What's coming at them. Okay, I probably talked too long about that. Sorry, friend.
No, it's actually important because it's one of a couple of things, duties that can kind of collapse together in that. Is one of them is, as the trustee, you are going to get the questions and you have an obligation to answer them. And those are part of your duties. So if you agree to take the job, you have a duty to actually do it. It is called a duty to administer the trust. So if you say, yes, I'm going to take this role, instead of saying, pass me by and go to the next person on the list, then you have to actually carry out the functions of the job. And so some of those are going to be things like you have to take control of the property. So your job is to actually gather all of the bank statements and the papers for the house and all of the stuff to figure out what is the trust property. That's part of your job, is to take control of that and to preserve it. So you can't just be like, this doesn't look important, and chucking it. You got to start with, let's lay it all out on the table and see what is here before we make any determinations about what happens to it. That's
Right.
job one
And part of that
that you
job
have.
too is is to get whatever is supposed to be in the trust. It's not, it doesn't, that duty doesn't just apply to things that are already in the trust and getting control of things that the trust already owns. It also, the second step of that is to get within the trust's control or within your ownership as trustee. We're talking to the trustee now. Things that are supposed to be in the trust that might not be in the trust, because life is dynamic. And you'll remember when we were talking about in the episode about setting up the trust, we talked about the concept of funding the trust, right? That's the steps that you take to grant the trust ownership of the things that the trust is supposed to own, or that you intend for the trust to own when you set it up. Well, sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. Easy example, we go to refinance the house. The house was in the trust. Our bank said, in order to do the refinancing, we need to title the house back to you individually. And then once the refinancing is done, you just, put the house back in the trust. Well, sometimes that last step of putting the house back in the trust after the refinancing happens, sometimes it doesn't. Then something happens to us, and the trust doesn't technically own the house, but it's supposed to. Part of the trustee's job is to make it so. Does it make sense? Talk back to us and tell us if that makes sense.
It makes sense to me.
Well, of course it makes sense to you, Fran.
So part of that job, though, in the taking control and also making claims on behalf of the trust if it's necessary, is also to make trust property productive. That is one of the duties that you have as the trustee. And so a place where this can come in practical speak, is it might be trust property. So the person already got it in the trust, so it is titled in the name of the trust, but they let somebody else hold it or use it, and we didn't need to talk about it. But now, as the trustee on behalf of this trust, my duty is to the beneficiaries, which may be other people. So if I was just letting you stay in the house and not charging you any rent, you just got to be here. But now this house is the trust property and my duty is to those beneficiaries. I have to make that property productive. I can't just have you sitting in here rent free if I could be renting it to somebody else. So it is my job as the trustee to assert the claim to either say, you got to pay, or we need to figure out how you're going to go so that I can get a paying person in, because my job as the trustee is to make this property productive for the benefit of those beneficiaries. Yeah. And they're looking at this trust that I'm a beneficiary of owns property, and this property is just a drain because we're still paying insurance and property taxes and all these things. And we could either sell it or rent, but it should be producing things instead of just sitting here draining things.
Right. And some of you might, as you hear that, you might come up with a question about, well, if I want to have my trust, I'm not the trustee, I'm the person who's setting up the trust. And I want to be able to provide a home or a place for my loved ones to always be able to live. And it's not important to me that they pay rent. I want to make sure that they have some place to live. This is why knowing part of the trustee's duties can help you, even if you're not going to be the trustee, because knowing that the trustee has a duty to make the trust property productive and to invest it prudently, right? In California, there are prudent investor laws, right? Then you can consider, as you're setting up your trust, you know what, maybe I want to include a provision in here that, my sister or my cousin or, my brother or my kids can live in the house rent free as long as the trust can sustain that from other funds, right? At that point, we go back to the trustee's duty to administer the trust according to its terms, right? And there's a term in there that says that this person gets to live in the house rent free, and so the trustee is in the clear, and your intention is carried out there.
Yeah. And that's what brings in that role that we've been talking about for the trustee as well, that they're going to get the questions and they have the duty to answer them. So, a big duty of the trustee, and this is one of the places where if it's going to be fighting, this is generally the first place where the fighting happens,
Mm-hmm.
is the trustee has a duty to report information and account to the beneficiaries. So if your trust is set up to say, I want my folks to be able to live in it free, then what that means is your trustee has the duty to report that information, which part of that reporting is at the first phase is to give a copy of the complete trust terms to those beneficiaries so everybody knows what rules we're playing under here, and then to report the information and account for those dollars there. So if it's this is what we are spending on the house, these are the other funds, so that all of that is transparent. That is the trustee's job, to report that to the beneficiaries and keep them in the loop of it. So if it's we are going to sell this asset because we are trying to fund this other thing, whatever that is, to just be transparent with that information, they have that duty.
Yeah. We're using the language of duty here because that's what a trustee has, and it is actually really important to reinforce that. So this isn't just a semantics, an exercise in semantics. We're not just using the word for the sake of it. But you can also understand this in a very practical, common sense way. You're at church, you're in the pew, your grandmother, I used this example the other day. Your grandmother hands you her handbag so that she can go and tend to her Ursha duties or to her nursing duties or to read the announcements or whatever it is that she is doing church service on that day. You have granny or auntie's handbag. Something happens with that handbag where the contents of the handbag are not the same when you give her the bag back as they were when she gave the handbag to you. What must happen? You have to tell Granny what happened to the contents of the handbag. Whether it's, Sister so-and-so asked for a piece of hard candy, so I knew you had some in there, so I gave her a piece of hard candy, right? Or, Minister Jefferson or whomever it is, I am totally making up this scene in my mind, like I have a whole church scene playing, right? But
Are there hats?
right, one of the ministers gave the scholarship check, and so I put the scholarship check in your purse. Either way, if the contents of Granny's bag are different, then Granny had to know about that. Otherwise, it could be a problem. It could be a problem later, right? That is the trustee's role. In that example, the holder of the handbag is the trustee. It's the person with the control and also the person with the duty to report what happened while they had control.
Yes. Now we're going to shift and talk about the powers. And when we think about Granny's handbag, slightly different.
Lisa said that's your ass.
Basically.
If something happens with Granny's handbag, you are in big, big trouble.
It is definitely the moment of look away.
Right, right.
So we talked about the duties, and it's all these obligations that our trustee has. Our trustee also has some power, because with all of this duty, they have to be able to accomplish the things that we've asked them to do. So we're reporting, we got to collect all of the stuff, but then we need to have the power to do something about it, to get it to the people or to manage it in their best interest, which is also part of the job. So some of those powers are going to be the things that you need in order to carry out those duties. For instance, if I need to separate and have identified the property as separate, it might be things like real basic. I need to open a bank account so that I can have the papers to account for this thing and to keep track of the money and have it held somewhere that I control it. If it is a piece of property, like real estate in particular, I have the power to get insurance on it to make sure that I am doing what I need to do to protect that property. If it is the real estate, I have the power to do things like to rent it or to lease it to make it, to carry out my duty to make it productive. So you can see the powers and duties link up very easily with why you have the power to do this is because it relates to you being able to carry out a duty that you have at some point.
Yep.
If I have this piece of property and we don't want to rent it, we don't want to lease it, and nobody wants to live in it that's a beneficiary, I have the power to sell it so that I can get the money, and I can put the money in a bank account to make it productive, or instructions to distribute it, then I can get it in there to distribute. Now, as you're thinking about these powers and duties and the linking, I am sure that Jill is laughing because Lisa done said something
Yes.
in those comments, and that's why I told you at the front end, this is where our example of Granny's handbag goes astray a little bit, because don't be selling, leasing, giving away, or renting out the stuff in Granny's handbag unless she gave you specifically the power to do it. So if she said, when Minister Jefferson comes by, you give him this offering envelope, then that is a power that you have as a trustee because it has been explicitly laid out by the grantor of that trust.
Yep.
But if the trust no say, give the stuff out, you no give the stuff out. You do not have the power to do that.
Yep. Yeah.
That was it, wasn't it?
Well, pretty much. I mean, Lisa said we nearly scared to death. She never wants to hold that hand. Like, never. The trustee role is the seat of responsibility for the trust. So yes, it is a big job, but it is not a gotcha sort of situation. It is not a situation where there is one false move, or you constantly or you have to be so anxiety ridden with thinking about carrying out the role that it's paralyzing. It's really not that so much as it is care, right? The think of the trustee role in the context of stewardship. If you think about it that way, then I think it helps to make it make a lot more sense in practical terms without so much fear. But also, one of the powers that the trustee has, and we sort of touched on it earlier, is to be able to get help, right? The trustee is not required to be a Jack or a Jill. See what I did there? Of all trades, right? The trustee can, if they need accounting help, for example, to take care of the accounts and to do the reporting out to help with the reporting out to the beneficiaries, they can hire accounting help, and the trust is actually what pays for that because that is trust business. If they need legal help, right, they can hire lawyers to help with answering legal questions or carrying out the trustee duties according to law, right? Because the trustee has the obligation to carry out the terms of the trust according to the terms, but also according to law. So if they need help with that, they can hire legal help at trust's expense because that is trust business, right? One of the things the trustee can also do, and sometimes people don't know this, the trustee can also go to court in a very limited way, because I know part of the point is to stay out of the courthouse, and it is. But sometimes a trustee will have a question, and they'll say, you know what, I feel like I'm in a little between a bit of a rock and a hard place. That if I do this one way, then I might get in trouble. But if I do it the other way, I might get in trouble. I'm not really sure what the best thing is to do here, or what my power is to do here, or what my duty is here. They can go to the court, ask for, in a very limited way. This is not opening up some big lawsuit. It doesn't have to be all that. They can ask for instructions from the court, and they can lay out the problem. A judge will call it one way or the other, and then, I mean, once you've done that, like what, clearly you've carried out your duty there. Yeah. So they can petition for instructions if they really are just sort of stuck for what to do. So there are plenty of helpers for the trustee in carrying out the trustee role. But our goal here was really to overview that role, but also to give you a bit more of the technical specifics for how to, for one, what that role requires and how to staff it and sort of how to set expectations for how it'll be carried out. Because this is a place where sometimes people do assume things that may not necessarily be true, right? So,
Yeah.
so thank you for this. I'm minding the time here, and we're coming up on an hour, and so I think that we're ready to summarize. Anyway, so yeah,
Yeah,
I think so. Did we miss anything?
we did not.
Okay, excellent.
So we talked about what the role of the trustee is, what the duties you have as a trustee are, and what the powers that you have as a trustee are. And a wrap up summary for all of that is get some help. So talk to somebody to find out, do they want to be it, and how to do the job,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually what your homework is.
Yep.
So your homework items are, think about and identify the people that you would want to put in this role of the trust that we've been building over these episodes. So who do you think would be good and suitable to be in that job, and who's a backup for that person as well? Then your second piece of homework is, so we had our thought work and we have our action work as part of our homework. So we're thinking about and identifying our people. Our action work is to actually talk to the people to see if they are willing to do this job. Great idea to just check in with them before you name them in your trust to confirm that they know that this is the duty that you're asking them to do, that they are willing to do that for you before you just go and put a bunch of names in the paper and have everybody say 1, 2, 3 nodded when called on to do the job. So talk to your people. So those are your two homework items. Then as a preview for next week, we are going to close out the roles because we've been talking about the people. So last week we talked beneficiaries. This week we talked trustees, but when we started, we identified the three main roles in this thing. So next week we're going to talk about the trustor, grantor, settlor. And so as you have already seen, that we just love to have some interchangeable language in the land of the law. And so the trustor, grantor, settlor is the person that is creating the trust. And so we're going to talk about what that role is and what their job is in setting the thing up.
Excellent.
Now, while I was wrapping up and pausing, I forgot to say out loud if there are any questions. So I am going to check with the trustee of the Oz
Questions.
board to see if we have any questions.
I'm the trustee of the comments.
Yeah.
No, Naomi has touched and agreed with Lisa that she doesn't want any parts of Granny's handbag, that it's a whole trap and she's not it.
That's why we talk to our potential trustees to
Right.
find out, are you willing to hold the handbag?
Right. That's the
Because
deal.
we don't want it left on the pew with nobody attending to it.
Granny would not appreciate that. So
Exactly.
so we don't have any questions that have popped through. So if questions come up for you that you didn't get to ask today, or frankly that just you didn't even think about today, that's totally fine. Feel free to reach out to us on Instagram. We are at Dahlia Law Group. We're actually at Dahlia Law Group on all of the social channels. Even though
And the internet.
we don't actually know what that means, but we had enough sense to ask someone to help us with marketing and social. So they said we are at Dahlia Law Group on all the social channels. So we're going to trust you to know what that means. But I know that we're there on Instagram. Our office phone number is in the chat box, as well as our website, which is also Dahlia Law Group. One question just popped through.
.com.
Yes, .com. Naomi is asking if he has to be a relative, and the answer is no. The trustee does not have to be a relative. The trustee does not even have to be a human. So the trustee can be a person, a group of people. So you can have a trustee by committee. You can also have institution. So think of a like a financial institution, a professional fiduciary, even some nonprofits,
Big
organizations.
Bank of Alicia in A.
Right. So even some nonprofit organizations provide
They gonna poo poo my little
professional
baby.
trustee services. I'm trying to answer a question, friend. so, so no, does not have to be a relative. Thank you for that question, Naomi. It's a good one. All right, you all. We will see you next week for more shenanigans, apparently, and trust and estates and legacy information right here on the live stream every Wednesday, 12:30 Pacific time. Tomorrow, if you want to join us or know somebody who might need to join us tomorrow evening, 7:30 Eastern time, 4:30 Pacific time, we will be joined once again for a special live stream segment about immigration and legacy. Immigration attorney Bianca Jordan will be joining us on tomorrow evening so that we can have more of an immigration and legacy conversation. So if you or somebody you know needs that information, then have them join us here. Same channel at 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific tomorrow, Thursday, September 2nd. I mean, September 3rd. Goodness, what are days? Okay,
You got
y'all.
the Thursday right.
Clearly, it's time for us to go. Have a good day.